Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pigeon Creek Shakespeare Company's Shakesquestration. I'm Catherine Mayberry, Executive Director of the Pigeon Creek Shakespeare Company, coming to you from our world headquarters in beautiful Grand Haven, Michigan. Now, during this time of social isolation, we are seeking to create some more video and online content to keep you in touch with our company and our artists. And those of you who have been to our live performances in person may occasionally have seen some of our Bard Beyond the Boards lectures or talkbacks with our actors after the shows, in which we discuss contextual information about the plays. Well, we thought this would be a great time to do some Bard Beyond the Boards online and let you get a chance to learn more about our company and the way that we perform and the history of Shakespeare's plays. Our company bases its performance philosophy on some performance conditions and practices from early modern England, the time and place in which Shakespeare and his contemporaries were writing their plays. Now, sometimes we even take those staging practices and apply them to more modern plays in order to discover something about the heritage of Shakespearean theater that has come down to us and to bring some of that immediacy and audience connection that was so much a part of the theater in Shakespeare's time period. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be creating some videos that help you take a deeper dive into some of those staging practices and learn about what it is that you're seeing when you come to see our shows, what goes into those choices that we are making. I'm going to start today by talking about theater architecture and the relationship between the actor and the audience. And I always like to start my discussion of theater architecture in Shakespeare's time period by first talking about theater architecture in our time period, just to create a contrast. So the most common theater architecture that we see in our time, at least in Europe and the US and in those places whose theatrical heritage comes from the time period of Shakespeare and other similar European theaters like the Golden Age of Spain. The most common theater architecture that you will see in those places if you walk into a theater today is what is called a proscenium theater. And in a proscenium theater, all of the audience sits on what's called the downstage edge of the stage. You can think of that as the front of the stage. And there's this piece of architecture outlining the stage that looks like a picture frame, right? And the stage goes back from that frame away from the audience. That picture frame is called the proscenium arch. And the proscenium arch actually separates the actor's space from the audience's space. This type of stage was already in use in places like Italy, close to Shakespeare's time period in the Italian Renaissance, but it didn't become the most common form of stage architecture until the second half of the 1800s. And the reason that so many theatrical practitioners moved to making the proscenium stage the most common form of stage architecture has to do with advances in stage technology. So the more technology there is that you have to hide backstage, the more useful it becomes to have that frame that is hiding those things from the audience. So if you want to or feel you need to hide things like the mechanisms that are bringing set pieces in, or the mechanism above the stage that is dropping backdrops in and lifting them back up, then you need some piece of architecture that hides all of that mechanical, technological stuff. And so the more you get those kinds of advances in theater technology and later on advances in electrical lighting, the more people move towards using that proscenium style stage architecture. So just for visual reference, let's take a look at a couple of photos of proscenium stages so you get the idea of what I'm talking about. And you'll see slides of a couple of our West Michigan proscenium theaters that some of you may be familiar with. That gives you an idea of what those proscenium stages look like. Now, the proscenium stage architecture gave rise to this concept in theater that we talk about, which is called the fourth wall. And you might have heard that term before if you've ever taken any kind of theater class. So the fourth wall is this psychological construct. It's like an invisible plane between the audience and the actor, and it comes from the idea that on those proscenium stages, that space, that plane of the proscenium archway that is between the audience and the actors is like the fourth wall of a room. And so when we go to see the theater in that kind of architecture, it's almost like someone has lifted out that fourth wall and given us, the audience, the opportunity to kind of spy on what's going on in the world of the play. But for the most part, both the actors and the audience, for the time that the play is going on, kind of buy into this assumption that the action of the play would be happening whether the audience was there or not. And actors even get taught not to break the fourth wall, right? Not to acknowledge that the audience is present by making eye contact with them or delivering lines to them. Or in the case of some modern plays where there is maybe one character who speaks directly to the audience, that's a very specific, purposeful breaking of the fourth wall. But in order to break that wall, it has to be present in the minds of both the actors and the audience in the first place. In Shakespeare's time period, we're just going to contrast that with the architecture of theaters in that time period, first of all. In the early modern theater, and in many earlier periods of theater, standard stage architecture had audience on multiple sides of the stage. The purpose-built playhouses of Shakespeare's time period, and I say purpose-built because they also performed in kind of makeshift theaters, like when they went out on the road, although they would set up the makeshift theaters with this same kind of audience actor physical relationship. In the purpose-built theaters, their standard architecture had a stage that had audience on three sides of it, right? It's called a thrust stage, which makes sense because it thrusts out into the audience's space. And then on the upstage side, the side furthest from that central audience, there would be permanent architecture, like sort of like the facade of a building, called the Franz Skene. And that was the standard thing that you could expect, sort of walking into any theater in London in Shakespeare's time. And so in Shakespeare's time, it's not just that actors or characters broke the fourth wall. It's that concept of the fourth wall didn't even exist, right? That concept and that psychological construct didn't come into being until much later in the theater history. So just to give you the contrast with those proscenium stages that you looked at before, let's take a look at a couple of reconstructions of Shakespearean theaters. So these will show you that thrust stage architecture and that Franz Skene structure. You're going to look at the Rose from the Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp in Michigan, and the Blackfriars Theater, which is the theater of the American Shakespeare Center in Stanton, Virginia. So just take a look at those so you have a visual reference to go with this concept of the thrust stage. So now we're going to add into our discussion of theater architecture the difference in lighting between modern theaters and the theaters of Shakespeare's time. So in the theaters in early modern England, you had two options for lighting. One is sunlight. So the famous outdoor playhouses like the Globe, where plays took place in daylight, were lit by the sun. And the other option is candlelight. So the indoor playhouses, like the Blackfriars, were lit by candles in huge candelabras that held hundreds and hundreds of candles. In either of those cases, the audience and the actors are sitting or standing in the same light. Now, in modern theaters, our most common experience is that when we arrive, we go in, we sit down. When the play starts, the lights go off in the audience and they turn on on stage. Since Shakespeare's time, theatrical lighting has gone through stages of using many different options beyond candles. So oil lamps, gaslight, limelight are some of the things that were used before the advent of electricity. And then the theaters started to be fitted with electrical lights in the late 1880s. And by the turn of the 20th century, almost all theaters in Europe and the US had electrical lighting, which of course is much safer than, for example, gas lighting. And that electrical lighting also makes it a lot easier to isolate portions of the building where you want the light on or off. So in order to highlight what the stage lights look like, you can isolate them and make them more visible by turning the lights completely off in the audience. Well, that while it's great for lighting technology and for the safety of theaters as compared to things like gaslight, does create another sort of distancing effect between the actors and the audience. It amplifies the effect of the fourth wall, right? Because now the actors are in a separate light than the audience is. And if you have ever been on a stage where you have lights, stage lights shining right at you, and it's dark in the audience, you know that when you look out into the audience, all you see is a sea of black, right? So the actor's connection to the audience is sort of cut off by that difference in lighting. Well, in Shakespeare's time period, when you've got what's called universal lighting, which means the actors and the audience in the same light, actors who were standing on stage could look out into the audience and see all of those faces looking back at them and make eye contact with individual audience members. Now, you've got these two things, right? These two kind of fundamental performance conditions, the thrust stage and the universal lighting. And those two things gave rise to or augmented or promoted the fact that in Shakespeare's time period, the playwrights were writing for what's called direct audience contact. And the direct audience contact, the characters speaking directly to the audience, is both informed and enhanced by the fact that they are on a thrust stage out in the audience's space and that they can see all of those audience members. A direct audience contact is not unique to Shakespeare's time period. For example, there was wide use of direct audience contact in something like medieval morality plays, right? But the sort of complexity of audience contact, this really in-depth exploration of the relationship between actors and audience and the characters and audience, came to fruition in the early modern English drama. All of these playwrights were exploring that concept in the texts of their plays. And for Pigeon Creek, one of the things that we notice about using that direct audience contact is that rather than saying, okay, we're going to take practices from Shakespeare's time period and that resulting in sort of a museum piece theater or historical reenactment, it actually makes the plays feel very alive and visceral and modern, right? There's an emotional connection between the characters and the audience when we can speak to audience members directly. And if you come to see one of our live performances, and we very much hope that you will be able to later in the 2020 season, you can start thinking about all of the different ways in which we use the audience, right? The texts of Shakespeare's plays offers many opportunities to involve the audience in different ways, even within the same play, even within the same scene. And it's a very sort of complex thing that we're always thinking about, and we train our actors in doing it. We discuss it in rehearsal. It's part of the experience of live performance for us. The next time we post one of these videos, I will get into kind of some of the different forms of audience contact and how that might show up in the texts of the plays. So I look forward to discussing that with you the next time that we get to post something. If you are enjoying all of our Shakesquestration videos, please follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel here. And if you would like to support our artists and their work to create immersive, intimate, immediate experiences of classical theater for our Michigan audiences, please check out the video description below for a link to a place that you can go to support us. Please stay home, stay safe, and remember to wash your hands just like Lady Macbeth. Until next time.